Life changes when you finally understand your worth. For 10 years, I served as the financial backbone for my entire family. Every emergency, every bill, every vacation, all of it fell on my shoulders. Jessica, you're doing so well. Surely, you can help out. Jessica, we're family. This is what family does. The requests never stopped, and I never said no. Until that Christmas dinner when I finally decided enough was enough. The moment I announced I was cutting them off financially, I watched their faces transform from festive cheer to cold calculation. They never expected me to find my voice, but when I did, nothing would ever be the same again. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The first time my family asked me for money, it felt good. I remember that moment clearly. My sister Caroline called, her voice trembling. As she explained how her car had broken down and she couldn't afford the repairs, she needed $800 and she needed it fast. I had just landed my first real job at Mitchell & Weston Financial after graduating with my MBA. The salary wasn't extraordinary, but compared to the student budget I'd been living on, I felt wealthy. "Of course I'll help," I told her without hesitation. The relief in her voice made my heart swell. This was what families did for each other, right? She promised to pay me back once she got her next paycheck. She never did. A month later, my younger brother Ethan needed help with his rent. Then my parents' roof sprung a leak. My cousin Taylor needed money for textbooks. Each time I opened my wallet. Each time they swore they'd pay me back. Each time the repayment never came. I didn't mind at first. I was single, lived in a modest apartment, and had few expenses. Helping my family gave me purpose. It made me feel needed and important. Growing up in Millfield, a small town where everyone knew everyone's business, I had always been the quiet middle child. Not as charismatic as Caroline, not as athletic as Ethan. I was just Jessica, reliable, responsible Jessica. The one who got good grades, who never caused trouble, who blended into the background. But now, I was someone they turned to, someone they valued. Over the next few years, my career took off. I moved from financial analysis to investment management, and my salary grew steadily. I bought a house in Oak Ridge, a nice suburb about 30 minutes from the city. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. 3 bedrooms, a small backyard, and a kitchen I never had time to use properly. As my income increased, so did my family's requests. "Jessica, Dad needs a new truck for his contracting business." "Jessica, Mom's arthritis is acting up and her insurance won't cover the specialist." "Jessica, Caroline's kids need braces." "Jessica, Ethan's starting a new business venture and needs seed money." I never kept track of how much I gave them. Looking back, that was my first mistake. I should have known something was wrong when my mother stopped asking how I was doing before requesting money. When my father would call, discuss the weather for exactly 2 minutes, then clear his throat in that particular way that signaled a financial request was coming. The holiday season was always the worst. Every December, my family would compile elaborate Christmas lists filled with expensive items they needed. I became Santa Claus, the magical entity expected to fulfill every wish. I'd spend weeks shopping, wrapping, and shipping gifts, only to receive a cheap tie or a coffee mug in return. But I told myself it didn't matter. I could afford it, and seeing their joy was enough. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. The turning point came during a Sunday dinner at my parents' house. I was 34 by then, still single. Relationships never seem to last when your family called at all hours with emergencies. My sister Caroline was complaining about her husband's stagnant career while simultaneously showing off her new designer purse. "How much did that cost?" my mother asked, eyeing the leather bag with obvious envy. Caroline waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, it was on sale. Only $800. I nearly choked on my mashed potatoes. $800, the exact amount she had borrowed from me 3 weeks earlier to cover her daughter's dance lessons. The daughter who, as I had just learned during dinner conversation, had quit dancing a month ago. I said nothing that night, but something shifted inside me. I began to pay attention, to keep records, to notice patterns. My family never asked about my life, my hopes, my dreams. When I mentioned being passed over for a promotion I'd worked hard for, my father changed the subject to Ethan's need for a loan to cover his mortgage. When I talked about possibly taking a vacation, my first in 5 years, my mother immediately suggested I use that money to help with my niece's private school tuition instead. It was during a late night at the office that my colleague Morgan found me staring at my spreadsheet of family loans. Morgan was one of those rare people who spoke her mind regardless of how uncomfortable the truth might be. "What's that?" she asked, peering over my shoulder. "Just keeping track of family finances," I mumbled. She let out a low whistle as she scanned the numbers. "Jessica, that's over $130,000 in the last 4 years. Have they paid any of it back?" I couldn't see her eyes. "Their family." "No," Morgan said firmly. "They're treating you like an ATM. A walking, talking ATM who doesn't charge fees and never runs out of cash." Her words stung because they contained a truth I had been avoiding for years. Later that night, I poured myself a rare glass of whiskey and really looked at my life. My retirement account was underfunded. The kitchen renovation I'd been planning for 2 years kept getting postponed. I hadn't taken a real vacation since college. Meanwhile, my sister had vacationed in Europe twice. In the past year, my brother drove a nicer car than I did. My parents' house had been completely remodeled while mine still had the original worn carpeting from when I bought it. I was living below my means so they could live above theirs. The holidays were approaching, and as usual, my inbox was filled with hints and outright requests. Caroline needed help with Christmas expenses. My parents' furnace was acting up again. Ethan wanted to buy his kids the latest gaming system. The list went on and on. For the first time, I didn't immediately say yes. I told them I'd have to check my finances, which led to uncomfortable silences and thinly veiled reminders of past assistance I'd provided. "Remember when you were in college and we helped with your books?" my mother said, conveniently forgetting that I'd worked 2 jobs to put myself through school while maintaining a scholarship. "Family helps family," my father added, his tone suggesting I was somehow failing a moral test by hesitating. I agreed eventually, as I always did. But this time, I made a decision. This would be the last Christmas I would serve as their personal bank. After the new year, things would change. I would change. But then came the Christmas party invitation. My parents were hosting, as they did, every year in their newly renovated home with its gleaming hardwood floors that I had paid for. The family would exchange gifts, eat my mother's famous roast beef, and inevitably, someone would pull me aside to discuss a temporary financial situation they needed help with. Only this year would be different. This year, I had my own announcement to make. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. As I hung up the phone, after confirming my attendance, I felt a mix of dread and determination. 10 years of being the family ATM was about to come to an end. I just needed to find the courage to stand my ground when I saw the disappointment, or worse, the anger, in their eyes. What I didn't expect was how liberating it would feel to finally say no, or how quickly their festive masks would drop when they realized their cash flow was about to be cut off. The week before Christmas, I found myself standing in Galleria Mall, staring blankly at a display of expensive watches. A salesperson approached, her smile bright and expectant. "Looking for a special gift?" she asked. I nodded absently. "For my brother." We have some excellent options in the $300 range, she suggested, guiding me toward a more modest display. No, I heard myself say. Show me the higher-end models. She brightened immediately, leading me to a glass case containing watches I knew. Cost thousands. As she described their features, Swiss movement, sapphire crystal, limited editions, I wasn't really listening. I was thinking about Ethan and the Rolex he'd been hinting at for months. This one is $4,850, she said, placing an elegant timepiece on a velvet pad. I stared at it, feeling a strange detachment. Last year, I wouldn't have hesitated. I would have pulled out my credit card, convinced that making my brother happy was worth any price. But today, something felt different. I'm sorry, I said finally. I need to think about it. The disappointment on her face mirrored what I knew would be on Ethan's when he didn't receive the watch. As I walked away, my phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. Don't forget Maddie and Emma want those designer boots this year, about $200 each. The girls are so excited about what Uncle Jessica is getting them. I stopped in the middle of the mall, shoppers streaming around me. My nieces were 12 and 14, $200 for boots they would outgrow in months. Boots their parents could afford if they managed their money better. Boots I was expected to provide because that was my role in the family. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and calculator. For the first time, I tallied everything. Not just the loans and gifts, but also the vacations I had never taken, the house repairs I had postponed, the retirement savings I had neglected. I calculated what my financial situation would look like if I had invested that money instead of giving it away. The numbers were staggering. If I had invested just half of what I'd given my family over the past decade, I could have been well on my way to early retirement. I could have fully renovated my home. I could have traveled to all the places I'd dreamed of seeing. Instead, I had a folder of loan agreements with family members, agreements I had meticulously drafted using my financial background, complete, with payment schedules that had never been followed. Not once had anyone made a single payment, not even a token gesture. Morgan's words echoed in my mind. They're treating you like an ATM. She was right, but it was more than that. They were treating me like I didn't deserve the money I earned, like my dreams and goals were less important than theirs, like my only value to the family was what I could provide financially. I thought about last Christmas, when I had given Caroline and her husband an all-expenses-paid weekend getaway while they gave me a coffee mug with "World's Best Brother" printed on it. I remembered how Ethan had shown off his new golf clubs, purchased the same week he told me he couldn't repay the money I'd lent him for his car repairs. I recalled my parents' subtle guilt trips whenever I mentioned spending money on myself. Must be nice to have extra money for luxuries, my mother had said when I bought my first new couch. Some of us have to pinch every penny, my father added, conveniently forgetting the fishing boat I had helped him buy the month before. That night, I made phone calls to financial advisors and researched investment strategies until the early hours of the morning. By the time the sun rose, I had a plan. I would reclaim my financial future. I would set boundaries. I would stop being the family ATM. The days before Christmas passed in a blur of last-minute shopping and preparation. I bought thoughtful but modest gifts for everyone. Books, scarves, gift cards, items within my newly established budget. No electronics. No designer clothes. No luxury watches. When Christmas Eve arrived, I drove to my parents' house with a strange sense of calm. The neighborhood was decorated with twinkling lights and festive displays. My parents' house stood out with its elaborate light show, another expense I had covered last year when my father complained about the neighbors' displays putting them to shame. I parked behind Ethan's BMW, a car nicer than anything I had ever owned, and gathered my bags of gifts. The sound of laughter and Christmas music grew louder as I approached the front door. I took a deep breath and knocked. My mother answered, her face flushed from cooking and wine. "Jessica, finally, everyone's already here." She accepted my kiss on her cheek and glanced at the modest gift bags in my hands with poorly concealed disappointment. "Is that all you brought?" "Merry Christmas to you too, Mom," I said, stepping inside. The house was warm and filled with the aroma of roasting meat and spices. In the living room, my family had gathered around the fireplace. My father was describing his plans for a summer fishing trip to Alaska. Caroline was showing off her new earrings to my aunt. Ethan's kids were glued to expensive tablets, probably last year's essential Christmas gifts. Uncle Jessica. My niece Emma spotted me first, running over for a hug. Her sister Maddie followed, both examining my gift bags with eager eyes. "Are those for us?" Maddie asked, reaching for one. "Some of them," I said, moving the bags out of reach. "But we open gifts after dinner, remember?" Their faces fell slightly, but they nodded and returned to their tablets. I noticed Caroline watching this exchange, her expression calculating as she assessed the size of the gift bags. Dinner was a lavish affair. My mother had outdone herself with prime rib, roasted vegetables, homemade rolls, and 3 different desserts. The dining table groaned under the weight of the feast. As we ate, the conversation flowed around me. Updates on jobs, complaints about neighbors, gossip about relatives who weren't present. No one asked about my life. No one inquired about my work, my health, my happiness. When I mentioned a project I was proud of at the office, my father nodded absently before turning to ask Ethan about his business. "It's growing," Ethan said enthusiastically. "In fact, I'm looking at expanding to a second location next year." He glanced at me. "Might need some investor capital, though." The hint was about as subtle as a sledgehammer. I took a sip of wine and said nothing. As dinner wound down, my mother began organizing the gift exchange. This was always a carefully choreographed event, with my parents distributing gifts one at a time so everyone could ooh and ah over each present. My gifts to the family were always opened last, the grand finale of Christmas generosity. I watched as my relatives opened their presents from each other. Modest gifts, thoughtful gifts, nothing extravagant, nothing that would strain anyone's budget. Then came my turn to open what they had given me. From my parents. A sweater from a department store sale rack. From Caroline and her husband. A gift card for $25 to a coffee shop. From Ethan and his family. A desk calendar with motivational quotes. I thanked them all sincerely. The gifts were fine, appropriate even. The issue was never what they gave. It was the imbalance of what I was expected to give in return. "Now Jessica's gifts," my mother announced, her eyes bright with anticipation. One by one, I distributed my packages. My father opened his fishing lure set with a furrowed brow. My mother accepted her cookbook with a tight smile. Caroline unwrapped her scented candles with obvious confusion. Ethan stared at his leather keychain as if waiting for the real gift to appear. My nieces found charm bracelets instead of designer boots, and couldn't hide their disappointment. The room grew quiet, uncomfortable. The festive atmosphere evaporated as everyone exchanged glances. "Is this some kind of joke?" Caroline finally asked, her voice sharp. I met her gaze steadily. "What do you mean?" "These are nice, Jessica," my mother said diplomatically, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But did you have a problem this year? Financial difficulties?" "My finances are fine," I said calmly. "I just decided to be more budget conscious this Christmas." "Budget conscious?" Ethan repeated, as if the concept was foreign to him. "But you always what?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. My father cleared his throat. "Son, if you're having money problems, you can tell us. We're family." The irony of his statement was not lost on me. I looked around at their faces, concerned, confused, but mostly disappointed. Not because they cared about my well-being, but because I had failed to meet their expectations. Because their cash cow had apparently run dry, something inside me snapped. "I'm not having money problems," I said, my voice steady. "I'm just tired of being treated like a walking ATM." The room fell silent. 5 pairs of eyes stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. My mother was the first to recover, her expression shifting from shock to practiced indignation. "Jessica Alexander Porter!" She used my full name, as if I were still a child who had misbehaved. "What a terrible thing to say on Christmas!" I set my wine glass down carefully. "Is it terrible to say it, or just terrible that it's true?" Caroline scoffed, tucking her hair behind her ear in that dismissive way she had perfected since adolescence. "You're being ridiculous. No one treats you like an ATM." "Really?" I reached into my jacket pocket and withdrew a small notebook. I'd prepared for this moment, knowing my family's talent for rewriting history. Last February, you needed $3,000 for Maddie's braces. In April, it was $1,200 for your car transmission. July, $5,000 for your kitchen renovation because you couldn't stand those old countertops another day. October, $2,500 for Emma's school. Trip to Washington, D.C. That's nearly $12,000 in 1 year, Caroline. Have you paid back any of it? Her face flushed. "You said those were gifts." "No," I corrected her, keeping my voice level. "I said I didn't need immediate repayment. You're the one who started calling them gifts after the 3rd time I mentioned a payment plan." My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Son, this isn't an appropriate dinner conversation. When is it appropriate, Dad? When do you need a new fishing boat? When do you want to remodel the bathroom? When is it appropriate to discuss how I've basically funded this family's lifestyle for the past decade?" Ethan, who had been suspiciously quiet, finally spoke. "Look, Jessica, we all go through rough patches. You've been fortunate with your career. We've always assumed you were happy to help out." "Happy to help," I repeated slowly. "There's a difference between helping during genuine emergencies and being expected to finance everyone's wants. Do you know I haven't taken a real vacation in 7 years? That I'm still driving a 10-year-old car while subsidizing your BMW payments?" "So this is about jealousy?" Caroline interjected, her tone sharp. "You give us money and then resent us. For using it?" I shook my head, frustrated by her deliberate misunderstanding. "This is about respect. About recognizing that my money represents my time, my effort, my life, and none of you seem to value that at all." My mother dabbed at her eyes, the tears appearing on cue. "I can't believe you're doing this on Christmas, after everything we've done for you." The emotional manipulation was so predictable it almost made me laugh. "What exactly have you done for me, Mom? I put myself through college. I've handled my own expenses since I was 18. I've been solving everyone else's financial problems while neglecting my own future." "We raised you," she snapped, the tears vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. "We put a roof over your head, food on the table." "Yes, you did the basic requirements of parenthood. Should I be paying you back for that forever?" My father stood up, his face reddening. "You're out of line, Jessica." "No," I said quietly. For the first time in years, I'm actually finding my line, my boundary, and I'm holding it. My nieces had slipped away to the living room, uncomfortable with the adult tension. I was glad they weren't witnessing this, though part of me thought it might be an important lesson in entitlement. Ethan leaned forward, adopting his reasonable business tone, the one he used when trying to convince investors to fund his perpetually struggling enterprises. "Jessica, brother, I understand you. Might be feeling underappreciated, but we're family. We support each other. Support goes both ways, Ethan. When was the last time any of you supported me?" When I was passed over for promotion last spring, Caroline changed the subject to her vacation plans. When I mentioned my back problems, Mom talked about her friend's daughter who was looking for investors for her massage therapy business. It's always about what I can give, never about what I might need. Caroline crossed her arms defensively. So you've been keeping score? Tallying up every dollar like some kind of miser? I wasn't. That was my mistake. I closed the notebook and returned it to my pocket. But I am now, and I've decided things need to change. My mother's expression hardened. What does that mean exactly? I took a deep breath. This was the moment I had been preparing for, the declaration of independence that had been years in the making. It means I'm not giving any more loans or gifts. It means when you call with a financial emergency, I'll offer moral support, but not my credit card. It means I'm reclaiming my financial future. The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost see the calculations happening behind their eyes, the mental adjustments to future plans that had factored in my financial support. My father recovered first. You can't just cut off your family. I'm not cutting off my family, I clarified. I'm cutting off financial exploitation. There's a difference. Caroline stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is absurd. If you didn't want to help, you should have said something years ago. You can't just change the rules now because you're feeling sorry for yourself. I'm not changing the rules, Caroline. I'm just not playing the game anymore. She glared at me, then turned to her parents. I think we should go. Clearly, Jessica is having some kind of midlife crisis. I smiled slightly at that. I was 34, hardly midlife, but Caroline had always excelled at dismissive labeling. You don't need to leave, I said. I didn't come here to ruin Christmas. I came to establish boundaries. Well, you failed at the first part, Ethan muttered, though I could see the wheels turning in his head, probably already planning how to adjust his business expansion without my investment. My mother stood up, smoothing her festive tablecloth with trembling hands. I think we should have dessert. In the living room. The girls are probably wondering what's taking so long. Classic deflection. Pretend the uncomfortable conversation never happened. Return to the script of normal family Christmas. I knew this technique well. It had been employed whenever difficult topics arose throughout my childhood. That sounds nice, I said, deciding to allow the temporary retreat. The message had been delivered. The boundaries had been drawn. Forcing them to acknowledge it immediately wouldn't change anything. We moved to the living room where my nieces were playing. With their new tablets, as my mother distributed slices of pecan pie, the atmosphere remained strained. Conversations were stilted, limited to safe topics like weather and upcoming community events. I observed my family with new eyes. Caroline kept checking her designer watch, the one she needed for work appearances that I had financed last spring. Ethan scrolled through his phone, probably already reaching out to other potential investors. My father stared into the fireplace, his expression troubled, perhaps calculating how to afford the boat maintenance without my assistance. As the evening wore on, I noticed the subtle shift in their behavior toward me. The warmth had evaporated, replaced by a cool civility. No one asked about my plans for the new year. No one sought my opinion on anything. I had transformed from valued provider to unwelcome truth-teller in the span of a single conversation. Around 9, Caroline announced it was time for them to leave. The girls hugged me dutifully, but their enthusiasm had dimmed, no doubt influenced by the tension radiating from their mother. "Merry Christmas, Uncle Jessica," Emma said, her young face serious. "Thank you for the bracelet." "You're welcome, sweetheart," I replied, touched by her genuine gratitude. Perhaps there was hope for the next generation. As they gathered their coats and gifts, I helped my mother clear dessert plates from the coffee table. "I hope you're satisfied," she whispered harshly when we were alone in the kitchen. "You've ruined everyone's holiday." I placed the dishes in the sink carefully. "That wasn't my intention." "Then what was your intention? To humiliate us? To make Us feel like beggars? I turned to face her, suddenly weary of the emotional gymnastics. My intention was to stop being taken advantage of, to make you all realize that I'm a person with my own needs and goals, not just a convenient source of cash. She shook her head, unable or unwilling to understand. I raised you better than this. Family takes care of family. Yes, I agreed. Family does take care of family. All I'm asking is that it goes both ways. She turned away, effectively, ending the conversation. When I returned to the living room, Ethan and my father were speaking in hushed tones by the door. They fell silent when they saw me, their expressions guarded. I should head out too, I said, reaching for my coat. Thank you for dinner. My father nodded stiffly. Drive safe. No hug, no Merry Christmas, just a perfunctory dismissal, as I stepped out into the cold December night, snowflakes beginning to swirl in the glow of street lamps. I felt a curious mixture of grief and liberation. For years, I had measured my worth in this family by what I could provide. I had confused financial support with love, generosity with self-sacrifice. The drive home was quiet, Christmas carols playing softly on the radio. I wondered if this was the last family Christmas I would attend. I wondered if they would eventually understand my position or if I would forever be cast as the villain in the family narrative, the selfish son who stopped giving. Back in my own house, I kicked off my shoes and settled onto the couch I had postponed replacing for 4 years while funding my sister's kitchen renovation. The silence was peaceful rather than lonely. On my coffee table sat brochures for a 2-week photography tour of New Zealand, the vacation I had promised myself once I reclaimed my finances. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. The burden of endless financial obligation had been lifted. Whatever happened next with my family, I knew I had made the right decision. I was no longer a walking ATM. I was Jessica Porter, reclaiming my life one boundary at a time. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in an eerie silence. No calls from family members with sudden financial emergencies, no texts asking if I could help out with post-holiday bills. The absence of these familiar intrusions was both refreshing and unsettling, like the sudden silence when a persistent noise you've grown accustomed to finally stops. I spent those quiet days reorganizing my life. I met with a financial advisor named Renee, a no-nonsense woman with steel-framed glasses who didn't mince words. "You've been hemorrhaging money," she said, reviewing the spreadsheets I'd created. "Let's stop the bleeding and start the healing." We developed a comprehensive plan: debt reduction, retirement contributions, emergency fund, and even a modest pleasure fund for travel and hobbies I'd been postponing. For the first time, I was planning my financial future without factoring in my family's constant demands. Most people who come to me after supporting family members have a hard time breaking the habit, Renee observed as we finalized the plan. "It's an emotional issue, not just financial." "I'm prepared for the guilt trips," I assured her. She smiled knowingly. "It's not just their guilt you need to worry about. It's your own. The first time you say no to a genuinely difficult situation, you'll question everything." Her words proved prophetic sooner than I expected. 3 days after New Year's, my phone lit up with Caroline's name. I hesitated before answering, my heart racing unexpectedly. "Hello?" I kept my voice neutral. "Jessica." Her tone was clipped. "We need to talk about Emma, my niece." Immediately, concern overrode my caution. "Is she okay?" "She needs braces. The orthodontist says it's urgent. Her teeth are severely crowded and it's causing jaw problems." Caroline's voice softened slightly. "The insurance will only cover part of it. We're looking at $4,000 out of pocket." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar pull of obligation. This was my niece's health, not a frivolous expense. This was exactly the type of situation Renee had warned me about. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. That must be stressful. So you'll help? The hope in her voice was palpable. I took a deep breath. Caroline, I meant what I said at Christmas. I'm not in a position to provide financial assistance anymore. This is different. Her voice rose sharply. This is Emma's health. Are you really going to let your niece suffer because you're having some kind of financial tantrum? The old guilt rose inside me, thick and suffocating. Was I being selfish? Was I putting my financial principles above my niece's well-being? There are payment plans, I suggested. The orthodontist's office can usually work something out. We can't afford monthly payments right now, she snapped. Not with the kitchen remodel and the trip we have planned for spring break. And there it was. The kitchen remodel, which I had already partially funded, and a vacation were taking priority over budgeting for her daughter's medical needs. This wasn't about Emma at all. This was about Caroline maintaining her lifestyle while outsourcing parental responsibilities to me. I think you need to reconsider your priorities, I said, my resolve strengthening. Emma's braces should come before granite countertops and spring break trips. The silence on the other end was glacial. When Caroline finally spoke, her voice was cold with fury. I always knew you were selfish underneath that generous act. Do you know what Mom said after you left Christmas dinner? She said you were just like Uncle Robert. Remember him? The family miser who died alone with all his precious money. The comparison stung more than I wanted to admit. Uncle Robert had been the black sheep of the family, estranged for decades after refusing to bail out my grandfather's failing business. In family lore, he was portrayed as a heartless hoarder who valued money above relationships. I had never met him, but his name was invoked whenever someone was perceived as insufficiently generous. I'm not Uncle Robert, I said firmly. I'm just someone who's finally setting healthy boundaries. Caroline laughed, a brittle sound devoid of humor. Keep telling yourself that. Meanwhile, your niece will suffer because you're too cheap to help. Your family. She hung up before I could respond. I sat with my phone in my hand, doubt seeping in despite my best efforts. Was I making a terrible mistake? Was I damaging my relationship with my nieces over money? I called Renee, needing a reality check from someone outside the situation. Children's medical expenses are emotional triggers, she acknowledged after I explained the situation. But ask yourself this. If Caroline can afford home renovations and vacations, why can't she afford her daughter's braces? Exactly, I said, relieved that someone understood. It's about priorities. It's also about teaching your family that you're serious about these boundaries, Renee continued. The first request after setting a boundary is often a test. If you cave now, they'll learn that all they need is the right emotional leverage. After our call, I sent Caroline a text. I care deeply about Emma's health. If you need help researching payment options or finding orthodontists with sliding scale fees, I'm happy to do that. But I can't provide the money. She never responded. The next challenge came from Ethan. Unlike Caroline's emotional appeal, his approach was businesslike. He invited me to lunch at an upscale restaurant, the kind where the menu doesn't list prices and the wine list is longer than most novellas. I'm glad we can talk away from the family drama, he said, after ordering a $200 bottle of wine without consulting me. Christmas got out of hand. I nodded cautiously. It needed to be said, but the timing could have been better. He waved dismissively. Water under the bridge. Listen, I've been meaning to talk to you about an incredible opportunity. Of course, this wasn't a reconciliation lunch. This was a pitch. For the next 30 minutes, Ethan outlined his latest business venture, a subscription service for luxury, pet products. His enthusiasm was genuine, his projections ambitious. In another life, I might have been impressed by his entrepreneurial spirit. The market research is solid, he concluded, refilling our wine glasses. We just need initial capital. To get production running, I'm looking for investors for this ground floor opportunity, I took a sip of the overpriced wine. How much are you looking for? 50,000 should do it. He said it casually, as if asking to borrow a pen. Of course, you'd be a true investor this time, not just providing a loan, 10% equity. We're projecting 7-figure revenue by year 3. I studied my brother's face, the easy confidence, the practiced sincerity. How many times have I heard variations of this pitch? The hemp clothing line that would revolutionize sustainable fashion. The food truck concept that would become a national chain. The app that would be the next Instagram. All funded primarily by me, all fizzling out within months. I'm not interested, Ethan. His smile faltered slightly. You haven't even seen the full business plan. This one's different. They're all different, I said gently. And they all end the same way. His expression hardened. Is this still about Christmas? I thought we were past that. This isn't about Christmas. It's about patterns. I've invested in your ventures before. They never succeed, and you never acknowledge why. Business involves risk, he countered. Not everything succeeds immediately. True, but at some point you need to evaluate why none of your ventures gain traction. You start strong, lose interest when challenges arise, then move to the next. Exciting idea. Ethan's face flushed. So you're not just withholding money. You're criticizing my business acumen now? I'm being honest, which is something our family rarely does when it comes to money. He leaned back, crossing his arms. You know what? Keep your money. I have other investors lined up who actually believe in me. I nodded. I hope it works out. I really do. When the check came, Ethan made a show of reaching for it, then patted his pockets with an exaggerated frown. Damn, forgot my wallet. Mind getting this one? I'll get the next one. The move was so transparent, so petty, I almost laughed. Instead, I paid the bill, nearly $400 for a lunch I hadn't particularly enjoyed, and considered it the final investment in a relationship that had been transactional for far too long. My parents were the last to test my resolve. They employed a strategy of silence followed by a coordinated attack. For 2 weeks after my encounters with Caroline and Ethan, they didn't call or text. Then, on a Sunday afternoon, they appeared unannounced at my door. We were in the neighborhood, my mother explained, though their house was 30 minutes away, with no reason for them to be in the neighborhood. I invited them in, noting how they both scanned my living room with critical eyes. Still haven't replaced that old couch, I see, my father commented. I like this couch, I replied simply. It was worn but comfortable, and now that I was rebuilding my savings, I could replace it when I wanted to, not when I could squeeze it into a budget strained by family demands. My mother settled herself primly on the edge of the couch, as if afraid it might contaminate her designer pants. Jessica, we need to discuss what's been happening with the family. I'm listening, I said, remaining standing. You've upset everyone, she began. Caroline is worried sick about Emma's dental issues. Ethan had to seek outside investors for his business. And your father and I, she glanced at him for support. We had to cancel our anniversary cruise, my father finished. The one we were planning for May. I processed this information silently. The cruise was news to me. They hadn't mentioned it at Christmas, likely because they had assumed I would be funding it. I'm sorry to hear that, I said finally. But I'm not responsible for everyone's financial decisions. My mother's expression hardened. We're not talking about financial decisions. We're talking about family support, something you seem to have forgotten about entirely. Family support, I repeated, tasting the irony of the phrase. Let's talk about that. My father shifted uncomfortably on my couch. This attitude of yours isn't helping anyone. My attitude? I gestured around my modest living room. I've supported this family financially for a decade. I've postponed my own goals, depleted my savings, and neglected my future to meet everyone else's needs and wants. And now that I've decided to stop, I'm the one with an attitude problem? My mother's lips thinned into a disapproving line. You've always been so dramatic, Jessica. No one forced you to help. You offered. The revisionist history was breathtaking in its audacity. I almost admired the conviction with which she rewrote reality. The first few times, yes, I offered. I conceded. But it quickly became an expectation, a requirement for maintaining my place in this family. That's ridiculous, my father scoffed. You're our son. Nothing could change that. Am I your son? Or your personal banker? Because lately it feels like the latter is my only value to you both. My mother's eyes welled with tears, her signature move when logical arguments failed. How can you say such hurtful things? After everything we've done for you? I took a deep breath, recognizing the familiar pattern. The guilt trip. The reframing of the narrative to make me the villain. The emotional manipulation that had worked so effectively for years. What exactly have you done for me recently? I asked quietly. When I needed surgery for my shoulder last year, neither of you offered to help with my recovery. When I mentioned wanting to take classes for professional development, you suggested I use that money to help Ethan instead. When was the last time either of you asked about my life, my dreams, my struggles, without it somehow circling back to a financial request? They exchanged uncomfortable glances. My father cleared his throat. We didn't realize you were keeping score, he said, his tone making it clear that my observations were petty in his view. I wasn't keeping score, I countered. I was giving freely, without expectation of return. But there's a difference between generosity and exploitation. When giving becomes one-sided and expected, it's no longer generosity. It's being used. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. So, now we're exploiting you? Your own parents? Mom, I said gently, when was the last time you invited me over without asking for money? She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. The silence was telling. I don't think either of you are bad people, I continued, softening my tone. I think we've all fallen into unhealthy patterns. You've come to see me as a resource rather than a person with my own needs, and I've enabled that by never setting boundaries. My father's expression hardened. This isn't about patterns or boundaries. This is about you suddenly deciding your family isn't worth helping anymore. That's not what this is about at all, I insisted. This is about creating a sustainable relationship where I'm not just valued for my wallet. My mother stood abruptly. I didn't come here to be psychoanalyzed. We came to tell you that your behavior is hurting this family. I remained calm, despite the churning in my stomach. And I'm telling you that this family's behavior has been hurting me for years. If that's how you feel, perhaps we should give you some space, my father said stiffly, rising to join my mother. Recognize the tactic immediately, the withdrawal of approval and affection as punishment for non-compliance. It worked when I was a child. It wouldn't work now. Space might be good, I agreed. It would give everyone time to adjust to our new dynamic. My mother's eyes flashed with indignation. New dynamic? You mean where you keep all your money to yourself while your family struggles? No. A dynamic where I'm treated as a son, brother, and uncle, not a financial institution. They left shortly after, my mother muttering something about ingratitude, my father silent and stern. As I closed the door behind them, I felt a curious lightness despite the tension of the encounter. For the first time, I had stood my ground without wavering, without being manipulated back into the role they had assigned me. The following weeks were quiet. My family's strategy seemed to be a coordinated silence. No calls, no texts, no casual drop-ins. I knew this approach well. It was designed to make me feel isolated, to question my decision, to crawl back begging for their approval and reconnection. In earlier years, it might have worked. The silence would have gnawed at me, made me doubt myself, driven me to make amends in the form of financial gestures. But now, the silence felt like a respite. a chance to rediscover who I was outside of my role as the family provider. I used this time productively. I joined a photography club, revisiting a passion I had abandoned for lack of time and resources. I started swimming at the local gym 3 mornings a week, improving both my physical health and my chronic shoulder pain. I reconnected with old friends who had gradually fallen by the wayside as family obligations consumed my free time. One such friend was Daniela, a former colleague who had left our firm 2 years earlier to start her own consulting business. We met for coffee on a crisp February afternoon, catching up on each other's lives. "You seem different," she observed, studying me over her cappuccino. "More relaxed," I smiled. "I am. I made some significant changes recently." "The mysterious financial boundaries you mentioned in your text?" I nodded, then found myself sharing the whole story. The years of financial support, the Christmas confrontation, the aftermath. Daniela listened without interruption, her expression thoughtful. "That took courage," she said when I finished. "Family systems don't change easily. They fight to maintain the status quo, especially when that status quo benefits everyone but you." "Family systems?" I asked. "It's a psychological concept," she explained. "Each family operates like an interconnected system with established roles and patterns. When one person changes their role, like you did, the entire system experiences disequilibrium. Everyone scrambles to restore the old balance." Her words resonated deeply. "That's exactly what's happening. They're trying everything to pull me back into my old role. And they'll keep trying," she warned. "The silent treatment is just one strategy. When that fails, they might escalate. Health emergencies, financial crises, emotional appeals. The system will fight hard before it adapts." "So what do I do?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. "Maintain your boundaries," she said, simply. "Expect resistance. Prepare for it emotionally. And most importantly, build a life that fulfills you outside of that system. The stronger your external connections and personal satisfaction, the less pull the old system will have on you." That conversation with Daniela proved prophetic. The family silence lasted exactly 3 weeks before the escalation began. It started with a late-night call from Ethan. His voice was tense, hurried. "Dad's in the hospital. Chest pains. They're running tests." My heart raced as I grabbed my keys. "Which hospital? I'm on my way." "Memorial," he replied. "But listen, Jessica." He hesitated. "There might be expenses. You know how insurance can be with these things." Even in a genuine emergency, the financial angle wasn't far from the surface. I ignored the implied request. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. At the hospital, I found my mother in the waiting room, her makeup impeccable despite the late hour and supposed emergency. Ethan paced nearby, checking his phone. Caroline hadn't arrived yet. "How is he?" I asked, genuinely concerned. My mother sighed dramatically. "The doctors say it might be angina. They're doing more tests." I nodded, taking the seat beside her. "Has he had symptoms before?" "Your father doesn't like to worry people," she replied vaguely. "But yes, he's been having episodes. The stress of everything lately hasn't helped." The implication was clear. My boundary setting had contributed to my father's condition. I felt the familiar weight of guilt pressing down, but remembered Daniela's warning. This was exactly the type of emotional leverage she had predicted. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "Stress affects everyone differently." My mother turned to face me directly. "The medical bills could be substantial. Your father's retirement plan doesn't cover everything." There it was, not even pretending anymore. "I'm sure the hospital has financial counselors who can help navigate insurance and payment options," I replied, maintaining eye contact. "I'd be happy to help research those resources." Her expression hardened momentarily before she composed herself. "That's not the kind of help we need right now, Jessica." "It's the kind of help I can offer," I said gently, but firmly. "The doctors Arrival interrupted what was shaping up to be another confrontation. As it turned out, my father's emergency was indigestion combined with anxiety. They were releasing him with instructions to follow up with his primary care physician and consider stress management techniques. When my father emerged from the examination room, he looked embarrassed rather than ill. "False alarm," he muttered. "Damn hospital probably charged a fortune to tell me to take an antacid." I drove them home, the car ride mostly silent except for my mother's occasional pointed sighs. As I pulled into their driveway, my father turned to me. "Thanks for coming, son, even with everything that's been going on." It was the closest thing to genuine appreciation I'd heard from him in months. I nodded, unexpectedly moved. "You're my dad. Of course I came." For a brief moment, I glimpsed what our relationship could be, one based on actual connection rather than financial obligation. But the moment passed quickly when my mother spoke. "If you really want to help, those medical bills will be arriving soon." I looked at her, suddenly tired of the manipulations. "Good night, Mom. I'm glad Dad's okay." As I drove home in the early morning darkness, I realized something important. My family's tactics, the guilt, the emergencies, the emotional leverage, were losing their power over me. I could recognize them for what they were without being pulled back into old patterns. The system was fighting to maintain its balance, just as Daniela had predicted. But for the first time, I wasn't yielding. I wasn't the same person they had successfully manipulated for years. I was changing, evolving, becoming someone who could love his family without being exploited by them. And if they couldn't accept that new person, that was their loss, not mine. March arrived with unexpected warmth, both in weather and in my personal life. As my family's attempts to breach my financial boundaries continued, something surprising happened. I discovered allies in places I least expected. The first came in the form of my 12-year-old niece, Emma. She appeared at my door one Saturday afternoon, her bicycle propped against my mailbox. "Uncle Jessica," she exclaimed when I opened the door. "I rode all the way here by myself." I glanced down the street, half expecting to see Caroline's SUV lurking nearby. "Does your mom know where you are?" Emma shrugged, her expression impressively nonchalant for a preteen. "I told her I was going to Lily's house, but I wanted to see you. You haven't been at family dinners." I hesitated, unsure of the appropriate response. My issues with the adults in the family shouldn't affect my relationship with my nieces. "Do you want to come in? I was just making lunch." She bounded inside, dropping her backpack by the door with the careless confidence of youth. In the kitchen, I assembled turkey sandwiches while Emma explored my living room, examining the new photography books on my coffee table. "These pictures are cool," she called out. "Did you take any of them?" "Not yet," I replied, bringing the plates to the living room. "But I'm learning. I joined a photography club." Emma settled onto the couch, accepting her sandwich with a polite "thank you" that reminded me Caroline had done something right in raising her. "Mom says you're mad at everyone," she said suddenly, with the directness only children can get away with. I sat beside her, considering my words carefully. "I'm not mad, exactly. We've had some disagreements about adult stuff. About money," she clarified around a mouthful of sandwich. "Mom says you don't want to help the family anymore because you're being selfish." The characterization stung, but I wasn't surprised. "Do you think I'm selfish, Emma?" She thought about it, her young face serious. "Not really. You gave me this cool bracelet for Christmas." She extended her wrist, showing me she was still wearing the charm bracelet I'd given her. "And you always remember what books I like when you get me birthday presents." My heart warmed at the realization that she valued these small, thoughtful gestures more than extravagant gifts. "Can I tell you something about adult relationships?" I asked. She nodded, curious. "Sometimes people get into patterns that aren't healthy. Like if one person always gives and another person always takes, That can make both people unhappy in the long run. Emma considered this. Like when Mom makes me always share with Maddie but never makes Maddie share with me? I smiled at her astute comparison. Something like that. I decided I needed to change some patterns in our family because they weren't making me happy. Is that why you wouldn't pay for my braces? The question caught me off guard. Your mom told you about that? Emma nodded. She was really mad. She said I might have to get the ugly metal ones instead of the clear ones because you wouldn't help. I set my sandwich down, suddenly not hungry. Emma, your dental health is important. The type of braces you get should be based on what works best for your teeth, not what looks prettiest. That's what Dad said too, she replied, surprising me again. He said Mom was being dramatic and that lots of kids have regular braces. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I think they're fighting about money a lot. I hear them at night. I felt a twinge of guilt. Had my boundary setting created tension in their marriage? But then I reminded myself that their financial issues predated my decision. If anything, I had been enabling their financial irresponsibility for years. Adults sometimes disagree about money, I said carefully. It doesn't mean they don't love each other or you. Emma nodded sagely. I know, but Mom keeps saying things would be easier if you weren't being so mean. But you don't seem mean to me. I wrapped an arm around her narrow shoulders. Thanks, kiddo. That means a lot. After lunch, I showed Emma some basic photography techniques with my camera, then rode my bike alongside hers to make sure she got home safely. As we approached their house, she turned to me with unexpected seriousness. You should come to my school play next month. I'm playing the lead tree in our forest conservation musical. I grinned at the earnestness of her invitation. A lead tree, huh? Sounds important. Super important, she confirmed. The whole forest depends on me. Then I wouldn't miss it, I promised, watching her pedal up her driveway. Caroline appeared at the front door, her expression shifting from concern to cold recognition when she spotted me. Emma was with you? She called out, her tone accusatory. She stopped by for lunch, I replied evenly. I wanted to make sure she got home safely. Caroline beckoned Emma inside without acknowledging my response. As I turned to leave, Emma called out, Don't forget about my play, Uncle Jessica. I waved, aware of Caroline's questioning look. Despite the tension with my family, this unexpected connection with Emma filled me with hope. Perhaps the next generation could have healthier relationships than we had managed. My second unexpected ally emerged the following week during a routine visit to my local coffee shop. I was working on a photography assignment, reviewing shots on my laptop, when a familiar voice interrupted my concentration. Jessica! I looked up to find my brother-in-law, Caroline's husband Robert, standing by my table with an awkward smile. In our family dynamic, Robert had always been a peripheral figure, present at gatherings but rarely involved in family disputes. He worked as an architect, and from what little I knew, had always been uncomfortable with Caroline's financial dependence on me. Robert, I said, surprised. What brings you here? He gestured to the chair across from me. Mind if I join you? I closed my laptop and nodded. Robert sat, placing his coffee mug carefully on the table. I wanted to talk to you, he began, his voice low. About everything that's been happening, I braced myself for another guilt trip or financial request. I'm standing by my decision, I said preemptively. Robert held up his hands. I'm not here to ask for money. Actually, I wanted to say I understand why you did what you did. His words were so unexpected I almost spilled my coffee. You do? He nodded, glancing around as if worried about being overheard. I've been telling Caroline for years that we were too dependent on you. It wasn't right, and I knew eventually it would damage your relationship with us. I studied him, looking for signs of manipulation but finding only sincerity. I never knew you felt that way. I wasn't exactly vocal about it, he admitted. It's hard to stand up to Caroline when she gets an idea in her head, and your parents have enabled her to entitle her entire life. You're telling me? I muttered. Robert sighed. When we first got married, I tried to establish a budget, save for emergencies, plan for the girls' college. But every time we started to get ahead, Caroline would find ways to spend beyond our means, always with the safety net of, Jessica will help if we need it. His frustration was palpable, and suddenly I saw him in a new light, not as a passive bystander, but as someone who had been struggling against the same dysfunctional system I was now confronting. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because your Christmas announcement forced a reckoning in our house, he explained. For the first time, Caroline has had to face the reality of our actual financial situation. We've had some rough conversations, but they were long overdue. And Emma's braces? Robert rolled his eyes. Already handled. Our insurance covers most of it, and the orthodontist has a payment plan for the rest. It was never the crisis Caroline made it out to be. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I was worried about that. Caroline used Emma's needs as leverage because she knew it would be your weak spot, he said bluntly. She's been doing that for years, using the girls to extract financial support from you. The confirmation of what I had suspected hurt, but it also validated my decision. How are things at home now? Robert ran a hand through his thinning hair. Tense, but improving. I've taken over our finances completely. We've cut up credit cards, canceled some subscriptions, and postponed the vacation we couldn't afford in the first place. And Caroline's okay with this? He laughed dryly. I wouldn't say okay. More like grudgingly accepting reality. But she's coming around. The girls actually seem relieved. Kids sense financial stress, even when you try to hide it. I thought about Emma's comments about hearing her parents argue. I never wanted to cause problems in your marriage. You didn't, Robert assured me. The problems were there all along. Your boundary just forced us to address them instead of papering over them with your money. He paused, looking thoughtful. In a way, you did us a favor. It's been painful, but necessary. What about my parents? I asked. Are they adjusting too? Robert's expression turned grimmer. That's a different story. Your dad's retirement wasn't as solid as they pretended. They've been living beyond their means for years, counting on your support to fill the gaps. I felt a twinge of concern. Are they in serious trouble? They need to downsize, something your mother has been resisting for years. The house is too big, too expensive to maintain. They have options, but none of them align with the lifestyle they think they deserve. His candor was refreshing after months of manipulation and guilt-tripping. For the first time, I was getting an honest assessment of the family's financial reality. I appreciate you telling me this, I said sincerely. It can't be easy going against the family narrative. Robert shrugged. I've always been the outsider. Anyway, Caroline's family has a way of closing ranks. He checked his watch and stood up. I should get going. I just wanted you to know that not everyone thinks you're the villain in this story. I extended my hand, which he shook firmly. That means more than you know. As he turned to leave, he looked back with a half smile. Emma's play is on the 15th, by the way. She'd be devastated if you missed her tree debut. I wouldn't dream of it, I assured him. Watching Robert leave, I felt a shift in my perspective. I had been viewing my stand against financial exploitation as a solitary battle, me against a united family front. But reality was more nuanced. The system I had been enabling had hurt more than just me. It had created stress in my sister's marriage, anxiety for my nieces, and postponed the necessary financial reckoning my parents needed to face. By removing myself as the financial safety net, I had inadvertently forced everyone to confront realities they had been avoiding. It wasn't comfortable, but perhaps it was exactly what the family needed. For the first time since Christmas, I felt not just justified in my decision, but convinced it had been the right thing for everyone, even those who currently resented me for it. April arrived with spring showers and an unexpected email in my inbox. The sender was my cousin Trevor, my mother's nephew, who lived on the other side of the country. We hadn't spoken in years beyond occasional holiday card exchanges and obligatory birthday messages on social media. The subject line read simply, "Family Reunion. Your presence requested." I clicked it open with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Jessica Hope. This finds you well. I'm organizing a family reunion at my lake house for Memorial Day weekend. It's been too long since the extended family got together, and frankly, I miss seeing everyone in one place. I know things have been tense with your immediate family lately. Your mother called me last month, quite upset about a financial dispute at Christmas. I got her version of events, but I'd like to hear yours too. Whatever's going on, I hope you'll consider coming to the reunion. Sometimes family conflicts are easier to navigate with more family members around. Dilutes the intensity, if you know what I mean. Let me know if you can make it. No pressure either way. Best. Trevor. I stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. Trevor had always been somewhat removed from the family drama, building his own successful life as a software developer in Seattle. We had been close as children but drifted apart in adulthood. The fact that my mother had reached out to him about our dispute suggested she was spreading her narrative far and wide. After some deliberation, I decided transparency was the best approach. Trevor, good to hear from you. It's been too long. Regarding the financial dispute, after a decade of providing substantial financial support to my parents, Caroline and Ethan, with no expectation of repayment, I've decided to stop. This decision came after realizing the relationship had become extremely one-sided, with my value to the family seemingly measured by my willingness to fund everyone's lifestyle choices. I'm sure my mother painted a different picture, but I felt, you deserve the unvarnished truth if you're curious about what happened. As for the reunion, I appreciate the invitation and will consider it. When do you need a definitive answer? Best, Jessica. His response came the next day, surprisingly supportive. Jessica, thanks for the straightforward explanation. I had a feeling there was more to the story than Aunt Deborah let on. Between us, she's always had a flair for the dramatic, and a selective memory when it comes to family matters. For what it's worth, I think setting financial boundaries is healthy. I did something similar with my brother a few years back, though on a smaller scale. It was rough at first, but eventually improved our relationship. No rush on the reunion RSVP. I'm just getting a head count for planning purposes. Think about it and let me know by the end of the month. Take care, Trevor P.S. If you do come, you'll have at least one ally in the family circle. That final line gave me pause. An ally. The concept seemed foreign after months of feeling like a pariah in my own family. First Emma, then Robert, and now Trevor. Perhaps I wasn't as isolated as I had believed. The reunion invitation lingered in my mind as I went about my days. Part of me wanted to decline immediately, to avoid the inevitable tension and passive-aggressive comments. But another part of me was tired of being excluded from family events, of being treated as if I had committed some unforgivable transgression by protecting my financial well-being. I brought up the dilemma during my weekly coffee with Daniela, who had become a trusted confidant in recent months. A family reunion sounds like a potential minefield, she observed, stirring her latte thoughtfully. But also an opportunity. An opportunity for what? More guilt trips and manipulation? I asked skeptically. An opportunity to demonstrate that your boundaries are firm, but you're not cutting off the relationship, she explained. Showing up says you still value family connections, just not financial exploitation. I considered her perspective. I'm not sure everyone will see the distinction. They won't at first, she agreed. But over time, As you consistently maintain the boundary between loving your family and funding them, the message will become clearer. Or, they'll just corner me and make demands in person, where it's harder to say no. Daniela smiled. That's why you practice your responses in advance. I'm not discussing financial matters at a family gathering. I'm here to reconnect, not to talk about money. Let's focus on enjoying our time together. You make it sound so simple, I muttered. Simple doesn't mean easy, she replied. But consider this. Avoiding family events gives them more power over you and validates their narrative that you're the problem. Showing up changes the dynamic. Her words resonated with me. I had been allowing my family's reaction to my boundary setting to dictate my behavior, essentially giving them control over my choices. Perhaps it was time to reclaim that control. The next day, I emailed Trevor accepting his invitation. Whatever happened at the reunion, I would face it on my terms. In the weeks leading up to Memorial Day weekend, I focused on strengthening myself both emotionally and physically. I continued my morning swims, finding the rhythmic movement through water, meditative, and calming. I read books on family systems and boundary setting, preparing myself with knowledge and strategies. I practiced responses to potential provocations, determined not to be blindsided by emotional manipulation. I also went shopping for a new wardrobe, nothing extravagant, but professional, well-fitting clothes that reflected the person I was becoming. My old wardrobe had been functional but neglected, another area where I had prioritized others' needs over my own basic requirements. The simple act of buying new clothes that made me feel confident was surprisingly empowering. The reunion was scheduled for Friday through Monday of Memorial Day weekend. Trevor's lake house was about a 4-hour drive from my home, situated in a picturesque area known for outdoor activities and stunning views. I decided to drive up Saturday morning and leave Sunday afternoon, limiting my exposure while still making an appearance. As the date approached, I received a text from Emma. "Are you coming to the lake house? Mom said you probably wouldn't." I smiled at her directness. "Yes, I'll be there Saturday and Sunday." "Yay," she replied immediately, followed by a string of tree emojis, a reference to her recent theatrical debut, which I had attended despite the palpable tension with Caroline. The morning of the drive, I packed lightly, casual clothes for lake activities, a bottle of wine as a host gift, and a small photo album I had assembled of old family pictures I'd found while reorganizing my home office. No expensive gifts, no checkbook ready to solve others' financial crises. Just myself and a genuine wish to reconnect with extended family. Members I hadn't seen in years. The drive was pleasant, the spring countryside vibrant with new growth. I listened to a podcast about financial independence, the irony not lost on me as I headed toward a gathering with the very people who had impeded mine for so long. Trevor's lake house came into view around noon, a sprawling, modern structure with large windows reflecting the water. Several cars were already parked in the circular driveway, including my parents' sedan and Caroline's SUV. My stomach tightened at the sight, but I took a deep breath and reminded myself of my purpose: to maintain my boundaries while still participating in family life. As I stepped from my car, the front door opened and Trevor emerged, tall and lanky, with the same easy smile I remembered from childhood. His hair had grayed at the temples, but otherwise he looked remarkably unchanged. "Jessica," he called, striding down the steps to greet me with a warm handshake that turned into a brief hug. "Glad you made it." "Thanks for the invitation," I replied, genuinely pleased to see him. "This place is incredible. Tech money," he said with a self-deprecating shrug. "Come on in. Most people are down at the dock or out on the water, but your parents are in the living room." I followed him inside, steeling myself for the first encounter. The house was beautifully appointed with rustic modern decor and expansive views of the lake through floor-to-ceiling windows. In the main living area, my parents sat with Trevor's wife, Alicia, and an elderly aunt I vaguely recognized. My mother spotted me first, her expression freezing momentarily before she composed herself into a polite smile. "Jessica, we weren't sure you'd come." "Trevor invited me," I said simply, shaking hands with Alicia and introducing myself to the aunt, whose name I learned was Edith. My father nodded stiffly from his armchair but didn't rise. The tension in the room was palpable until Aunt Edith broke it with unexpected forthrightness. "So you're the one who finally stood up to Deborah and Richard," she said, peering at me over her glasses. "About time someone did." My mother's face flushed. Crimson. "Edith, that's hardly—" "Oh, hush, Deborah," the old woman interrupted. "Everyone in this family knows you two have been living off your son for years. Shameful, if you ask me." Trevor coughed uncomfortably. "Can I get you a drink, Jessica? Beer, wine, something stronger?" "Beer would be great," I replied, grateful for the diversion. As Trevor led me to the kitchen, I heard Aunt Edith continuing her commentary behind us. "In my day, parents supported their children, not the other way around." "Sorry about that," Trevor said as he handed me a craft beer from the refrigerator. "Aunt Edith has lost her filter in her old age. Say whatever pops into her head." I couldn't help smiling. Honestly, it's refreshing after months of gaslighting and guilt trips. Trevor leaned against the counter. "I should warn you, Caroline's been working the room since she arrived yesterday. According to her, you've abandoned the family in their time of need because you're having some kind of midlife crisis." I sighed, unsurprised. "And people believe her?" "Some do, some don't." He shrugged. "The older generation tends to side with your parents. Family loyalty and all that. The cousins our age seem more skeptical, especially those who've dealt with similar issues." "I'm not here to defend myself or win a popularity contest," I said. "I just didn't want to be excluded from family events because of my financial boundaries." Trevor nodded approvingly. "Good attitude. For what it's worth, I think people will form their own opinions based on how you conduct yourself this weekend." He gestured toward the back doors. "Want to head down to the dock? Most of the cousins are down. There with the kids." I followed him through the house and down a winding path to the lake where about 20 people were gathered. Some swimming, others lounging in Adirondack chairs or preparing boats for afternoon outings. I recognized most of them, though some of the children had grown considerably since I'd last seen them. Emma spotted me first, breaking away from a group of kids to run toward me. "Uncle Jessica, you really came!" She threw her arms around my waist in an enthusiastic hug. "I promised, didn't I?" I said, returning the hug. "How's the water?" "Perfect. You should go swimming. Mom said you probably wouldn't want to participate in family activities anymore, but I told her that was stupid." I stifled a laugh at her bluntness. "Well, I might need to borrow a towel, but swimming sounds great." Emma grabbed my hand and dragged me toward the group, announcing my arrival with all the subtlety of a foghorn. "Look, everyone! Uncle Jessica is here and he's going swimming with us." Several cousins greeted me warmly. Others, particularly those closer to my parents' age, offered more reserved acknowledgments. Caroline, sitting under an umbrella with a magazine, pointedly continued reading without looking up. For the next few hours, I deliberately focused on reconnecting with relatives I hadn't seen in years. I joined a group of cousins for a boat ride around the lake, genuinely interested in hearing about their lives and careers. I played water games with the children, including Emma and Maddie, who seemed thrilled to have my attention. I offered to help with the afternoon barbecue, working alongside Trevor and 2 other cousins to grill for the large group. Throughout it all, I maintained a simple strategy. Be present, be engaged, but don't discuss finances. When one uncle hinted at his struggling business venture, I steered the conversation toward industry trends rather than potential investment. When an aunt mentioned her daughter's expensive college tuition, I sympathized with the high cost of education without offering assistance. By dinner time, I had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The initial awkwardness had faded as most relatives responded to my genuine interest in their lives. We gathered at long tables on the deck overlooking the lake, the conversation flowing as easily as the wine Trevor had generously provided. I found myself seated between Trevor and a cousin from the West Coast, with Emma insisting on taking the chair directly across from me. The distance from my immediate family, who had clustered at the far end of the table, allowed me to relax and enjoy the meal. As twilight descended and lanterns illuminated the deck, I realized something unexpected. I was actually enjoying myself. For the first time in years, I was participating in a family gathering without the weight of financial expectation pressing down on me. I was just Jessica, cousin, uncle, nephew, not Jessica the walking ATM. As evening settled over the lake, the younger children were ushered to bed while the adults gathered around a fire pit on the beach. The orange flames cast flickering shadows across familiar faces, the crackling wood and gentle lapping of waves creating a peaceful backdrop for conversation. I sat between Trevor and his wife Alicia, nursing a glass of whiskey and enjoying the rare sense of belonging. The conversation flowed easily, reminiscences about childhood summers, updates on careers and children, gentle teasing about past family misadventures. For a while, it seemed possible to exist in this family circle without tension or ulterior motives. Then my father cleared his throat from across the fire. "Jessica, your mother and I were discussing our anniversary trip earlier." The casual atmosphere immediately tensed. Several relatives who knew about our situation exchanged glances. Trevor shifted slightly beside me, a subtle gesture of support. "That's nice," I replied neutrally, taking a sip of my whiskey. "What are you planning?" My mother leaned forward, the firelight accentuating the lines around her mouth. "We were hoping to take that Alaskan cruise we've talked about for years. You know, the one we had to cancel." The implication hung in the air. The cruise they had to cancel because I was no longer funding their lifestyle choices. "Alaska is beautiful," I responded, deliberately ignoring the hook. "I've heard the best time to go is late summer." My father frowned, frustrated by my evasion. "The point is, it's expensive, especially on a fixed retirement income." Trevor attempted to redirect the conversation. "Speaking of Alaska, did anyone see that documentary about we shouldn't be embarrassed to discuss financial matters among family?" My mother interrupted, her voice carrying the practiced tone of injured dignity. "After all, we've always been there for each other in times of need." I could feel the eyes of extended family members shifting between us, curious about the brewing confrontation. I had two choices: engage in the manipulation attempt or deflect it entirely. "I agree," I said calmly. "Financial literacy is important. I've been reading an interesting book about retirement planning strategies for people in their 60s. I'd be happy to lend it to you." Caroline scoffed audibly from her seat beside our mother. "That's your solution? A book?" "Caroline," her husband Robert warned quietly, but she was already launched. "Don't you think it's a little hypocritical to sit here pretending everything's normal when you've basically abandoned your family?" Her voice rose, drawing attention from even those who had been engaged in separate conversations. I took a measured breath. "I haven't abandoned anyone. I'm literally sitting right here." "You know what I mean," she snapped. "For years you helped whenever we needed it. Now suddenly you're too good for us? Too selfish to share your success?" The accusation hung in the night air. Several relatives looked uncomfortable, while others appeared intrigued by the drama unfolding. Aunt Edith muttered something that sounded suspiciously like entitled nonsense. Trevor spoke up. "Maybe this isn't the best venue for— No, let's have this conversation," Ethan interjected, joining the fray from where he'd been quietly listening. "I'm curious to hear Jessica explain why his investment portfolio is more important than his own family's well-being." The framing was classic manipulation, positioning my basic financial self-care as selfishness while casting their demands as legitimate needs. A year ago it might have worked. Tonight it just felt transparent. I'm not discussing my financial decisions at a family gathering, I said firmly. That's a boundary I'm maintaining. Boundaries. My mother threw her hands up dramatically. That's all we hear from you now. When did you become so cold, Jessica? We didn't raise you to turn your back on family. The irony of her statement struck me forcefully. For a decade, I had demonstrated the exact opposite of turning my back on family. I had sacrificed my own financial security to support theirs. Yet the moment I stopped, I was labeled selfish. I think there's a fundamental difference in how we're viewing this situation, I said carefully. You see my decision as withdrawing support from my family. I see it as establishing healthy limits after years of one-sided financial responsibility. My father leaned forward, his expression hardening. One-sided? We gave you everything growing up. We sacrificed for your education, your opportunities. What do you call that? Parenting, I replied simply. That's what parents are supposed to do for their children. It doesn't create a lifetime debt that I'm obligated to repay by funding your retirement lifestyle. A murmur ran through the assembled relatives. I noticed several of my cousins nodding, subtly in agreement. I never thought I'd see the day when my own son would speak to me this way, my mother said, her voice trembling with what I recognized as performative emotion rather than genuine hurt. It was a tactic she'd employed throughout my childhood, tears as a means of control rather than an expression of authentic feeling. I'm speaking to you with honesty and respect, I countered. I'm just not giving you what you want. Caroline stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. You've become so selfish since Christmas. It's like we don't even know you anymore. Or maybe, Robert said unexpectedly, you're finally seeing the real Jessica instead of just what he could do for you. The shock of my brother-in-law contradicting. Caroline publicly, momentarily silenced everyone. She turned to him, visibly betrayed. Excuse me? Robert rarely spoke up in family conflicts, which made his intervention all the more powerful. I'm just saying that maybe we should consider Jessica's perspective. He supported this family financially for years without complaint. Is it really so unreasonable that he wants to focus on his own future now? You're taking his side? Caroline's voice rose incredulously. I'm acknowledging that there are two sides, Robert replied, maintaining a calm I had to admire. And maybe, just maybe, we've been taking advantage of his generosity for too long. My mother shook her head dismissively. This isn't about taking advantage. This is about family responsibility. Something Jessica seems to have forgotten. With all due respect, Aunt Deborah, Trevor interjected. Responsibility goes both ways. From what I understand, Jessica has been extremely responsible toward this family for years, perhaps unreasonably so. The conversation was rapidly dividing the family circle. Some relatives looked uncomfortable, clearly wishing to be elsewhere. Others leaned forward, invested in the unfolding drama. A few, like Aunt Edith, seemed to be thoroughly enjoying the spectacle. This is exactly why I've been avoiding family gatherings, I said, addressing the group rather than just my immediate family. I didn't want my personal boundaries to create tension for everyone else. But I also refuse to be manipulated or guilt-tripped about my financial decisions. Nobody is manipulating you, my father insisted, though his tone contradicted his words. We're simply pointing out that family supports family. Always has, always will. I agree completely, I replied, but support can take many forms. It doesn't have to be financial. It can be emotional, practical, or just being present for important moments. I gestured around the fire, like I'm trying to do tonight. A cousin I hadn't spoken with in years, Melissa, unexpectedly spoke up. I think Jessica makes a good point. My husband and I went through something similar with his brother a few years ago. The constant financial requests were damaging our relationship until we finally set limits. It was hard at first, but ultimately healthier for everyone. Another cousin nodded. My therapist calls it enabling, when you keep rescuing people from the consequences of their own financial decisions. It prevents them from developing better habits. Oh, so now we're being psychoanalyzed by amateur therapists, Caroline snapped. This isn't about enabling or boundaries or whatever self-help jargon you've picked up. This is about Jessica. Deciding his money is more important than his family. That's not fair, Mom, a small voice piped up. Everyone turned to see Emma standing at the edge of the gathering in her pajamas, apparently having snuck back down after being put to bed. Uncle Jessica came to my play even though you said he wouldn't. And he takes real interest in my stuff, not just buying me things. Caroline's face flushed. Emma, go back to bed. This is adult conversation. But you're being mean to Uncle Jessica, and he's not being mean back, Emma persisted with the straightforward logic of a child. That doesn't seem fair. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. The simple observation from a 12-year-old had cut through the layers of adult justification and manipulation, exposing the dynamic for what it was. Robert stood and gently guided Emma back toward the house. Come on, sweetie. Let's get you back to bed. As they walked away, Emma called back over her shoulder. Good night, Uncle Jessica. I'm glad you came. Her innocent declaration hung in the air, a stark contrast to the tension that had preceded it. I raised my hand in a small wave, unexpectedly, moved by her support. When they were out of earshot, Trevor cleared his throat. I think we could all use a reset here. This was supposed to be a relaxing family weekend, not a tribunal. Several relatives nodded in agreement. My mother opened her mouth as if to protest, but my father placed a restraining hand on her arm. Fine, she said tightly. But this doesn't resolve anything. It wasn't meant to, I replied, keeping my voice even. Some differences can't be resolved in one conversation. But I hope we can at least agree to respect each other's positions, even when we disagree. My father stood up abruptly. I think your mother and I will turn in for the night. It's been a long day. As they departed, followed shortly by Caroline, who left without another word to me, the atmosphere around the fire noticeably lightened. Conversations gradually resumed, drifting to safer topics like summer plans and sports teams. Trevor leaned over to speak quietly. You handled that well, standing your ground without escalating. It was bound to happen, I replied, staring into the flames. At least it's out in the open now. For what it's worth, he said. I think more people understand your position than you realize. Family financial dynamics can be complicated, but most rational adults recognize the need for boundaries. Aunt Edith, overhearing from her nearby seat, cackled softly. In my 82 years, I've learned one thing for certain. Those who scream loudest about family obligation are usually the ones taking advantage. Good for you, young man. Should have done it years ago. As the night progressed and the fire burned lower, relatives gradually dispersed to their assigned rooms. I remained by the embers, watching the occasional spark rise toward the star-filled sky. Despite the confrontation, or perhaps because of it, I felt strangely at peace. I had faced the accusations directly, maintained my boundaries without hostility, and discovered unexpected allies in the family circle. More importantly, I had confirmed what I'd begun to suspect months ago. The problem wasn't me. It never had been. The problem was a dysfunctional system that I had enabled for too long. And while changing that system was painful and messy, it was necessary, not just for my well-being, but ultimately for everyone involved. As I finally rose to head to bed, I realized the lake house had given me something unexpected: perspective. Seeing my immediate family's behavior through the eyes of extended relatives had confirmed that their expectations were indeed unreasonable, their tactics manipulative. I wasn't crazy, selfish, or abandoning anyone. I was simply establishing healthy limits after years without them. And for the first time, I felt not just justified in my decision, but genuinely at peace with it. The morning after the confrontation dawned clear and bright, sunlight dancing across the lake's surface. I woke early, a habit developed over months of pre-work swimming sessions, and made my way quietly downstairs. The house was still silent, most of its occupants taking advantage of the holiday weekend to sleep in. In the kitchen, I found Trevor already up, coffee mug in hand as he gazed out at the water. "Early riser too?" he asked, reaching for a second mug. I nodded, accepting the offered coffee. "New habit. I swim most mornings now." "The lake's all yours if you're interested," he offered. "Water's cold this time of year, but invigorating." 20 minutes later, I was cutting through the glassy surface of the lake, each stroke propelling me further from shore. The cold water was a shock at first, but my body quickly adjusted, finding its rhythm. As I swam parallel to the shoreline, my mind cleared of the previous night's tension. There was something purifying about physical exertion in natural surroundings, as if the lake itself was washing away lingering doubts and second thoughts. When I returned to the dock, Trevor was waiting with a towel. "Impressive distance," Isa commented. "You've been doing this a while." "Since January," I replied, toweling off. "It started as physical therapy for my shoulder, but now it's more like mental therapy." He nodded knowingly. "Finding something just for yourself, that's important." We walked back toward the house in companionable silence. As we approached, I could see activity through the windows, relatives beginning to stir, the day's socializing about to begin. I felt centered and ready in a way I wouldn't have been without the morning swim. Breakfast was a casual, help-yourself affair with platters of food laid out on the kitchen island. I filled a plate and found a seat on the deck, greeting relatives as they emerged. My parents and Caroline were noticeably absent, likely avoiding me after the previous night's confrontation. Emma, however, had no such reservations. She plopped down beside me with a plate piled high with pancakes. "Are you still mad about last night?" she asked around a mouthful of breakfast. "I wasn't mad," I corrected gently. "Just setting boundaries." She considered this, chewing thoughtfully. "Mom's definitely mad. She and Dad were arguing in their room this morning." I felt a twinge of guilt. "I'm sorry about that." Emma shrugged with the resilience of youth. "They argue a lot anyway, mostly about money." She speared another piece of pancake. "Dad says we need to live within our means, whatever that means." "It's good advice," I replied, wondering how much she understood about the family's financial dynamics. "It just means spending only what you can afford." "Like not buying designer boots when you can get regular ones that work fine?" she asked innocently. I suppressed a smile at her perceptiveness. "Something like that." "I told Mom I don't even care about those expensive boots anymore," she continued. "Lily's mom got her the super expensive ones, and they hurt her feet, and she can't even wear them now." The simple wisdom of a 12-year-old was sometimes more profound than any adult perspective. "That happens a lot with expensive things," I observed. "They're not always better, just costlier." Emma nodded sagely. "That's what Dad says. He says we need to be more like you." This caught me off guard. "Like me?" "Yeah. He says you're smart. With money because you think about what you actually need, not just what you want right this minute." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "He showed us your photograph of that mountain in New Zealand that you're saving to visit. He said that's what smart saving looks like, having a real goal, not just buying stuff to impress people." I was touched that Robert had been using me as a positive financial example for the girls. It was a perspective on my choices I hadn't considered, that my boundary setting might actually be modeling healthier financial behavior for the next generation. The rest of the morning passed pleasantly. I joined a group heading out on Trevor's pontoon boat, deliberately choosing an activity where conversation could remain casual. The gentle rocking of the boat and the shared experience of spotting wildlife along the shoreline created a natural camaraderie that transcended family tensions. It was mid-afternoon when my mother finally approached me. I was helping Trevor clean the outdoor grill after lunch when she appeared on the deck, her expression carefully neutral. "Jessica, could we talk privately for a moment?" Trevor caught my eye with a questioning look. I nodded reassuringly and followed my mother to a quiet corner of the property, a small gazebo overlooking the water. She sat primly on the bench, smoothing her slacks. "Your father and I have been discussing yesterday's situation." I waited, giving her space to continue. "We feel that things got out of hand," she said carefully. "The reunion wasn't the appropriate place for such personal matters." "I agree," I replied simply. "I didn't bring it up." She pursed her lips. Nevertheless, it created an uncomfortable atmosphere for everyone. Family gatherings should be harmonious. I recognized the familiar pattern, surface concern for family harmony that actually translated to, "Don't challenge the status quo publicly." In the past, I would have apologized automatically, accepting responsibility for tensions I hadn't created. Now, I remained silent, waiting for her to get to the real point. After a moment, she sighed. "Jessica, I don't think you understand the position you've put us in. Your father's retirement fund isn't what it should be. The market downturn affected our investments significantly. We had always assumed that as our only successful child, you would help ensure our comfort in our later years." There it was, the admission that their financial planning had explicitly factored in my continued support. Not as an emergency backup, but as a primary strategy. "I'm sorry about your investment losses," I said sincerely. "That must be stressful. Have you consulted a financial advisor about restructuring your retirement plan?" Her expression tightened. "That's not the point, Jessica. The point is that families support each other. Your father and I gave you every advantage: good schools, extracurricular activities, college without student loans. It was always understood that such investments would be returned in kind." I considered her words carefully. "Mom, I appreciate the opportunities you provided, truly. But viewing parenthood as a financial investment with expected returns isn't healthy. You chose to have children and provide for them. That was your responsibility, not a transaction with future payback terms." "Such cold, businesslike language," she murmured. "You never used to speak this way." "I'm not being cold. I'm being clear," I countered. "And clarity is something our family has always avoided when it comes to financial expectations." She was quiet for a moment, staring out at the lake. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its practiced steadiness. "What do you expect us to do? We're too old to start over financially." For the first time, I glimpsed genuine vulnerability beneath her carefully maintained facade. Not manipulation, but real fear about their future. Despite everything, she was still my mother, and I couldn't be indifferent to her concerns. "You have options," I said more gently. "Downsizing to a smaller home would free up substantial equity. Your current house is much larger than you need, and the maintenance costs are excessive for 2 people. A financial advisor could help you create a realistic budget based on your actual income, not anticipated supplements from me." She flinched at the directness of my assessment, but didn't immediately reject it. "Your father would never agree to sell the house. His pride wouldn't allow it." "Pride is expensive," I observed, "and at some point, practical realities have to take precedence over appearances." She turned to me, studying my face with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "You've changed, Jessica. Not just your decision about money, but something deeper." "I have," I acknowledged. "I've learned that helping isn't always helping, that sometimes it's enabling. I've learned that my own financial security matters too, and I've learned that real family support isn't measured in dollars. And if we genuinely need help someday, real help, not just lifestyle maintenance?" It was a fair question, one I had considered during my own soul-searching. If there's ever a genuine emergency, medical bills insurance won't cover essential home repairs, true necessities, I would consider it case by case. But I won't be an ATM anymore, Mom. That chapter is closed. She nodded slowly, not in agreement. Necessarily, but in acknowledgement of my position. I should get back to the house. Your father will be wondering where I've gone. As she stood to leave, I reached out and gently touched her arm. I do love you and Dad. Setting financial boundaries. Doesn't change that. Something flickered in her eyes, perhaps recognition, perhaps just resignation. We'll see, was all she said before walking away. I remained in the gazebo for a while afterward, processing the conversation. It hadn't been a reconciliation exactly, but it felt like the first honest exchange we'd had in months. There was a certain relief in having everything acknowledged openly, even if resolution remained distant. By the time I returned to the house, preparations for the evening barbecue were underway. I joined the activity, helping set up tables and arrange chairs on the expansive lawn. The physical work was satisfying, and the casual conversation with cousins I rarely saw provided a welcome distraction from heavier thoughts. As sunset approached and the gathering moved to the outdoor dining area, I found myself seated at a table with Trevor, Alicia, and several cousins from my generation. My parents and Caroline had positioned themselves at a different table, maintaining distance while avoiding outright snubbing. It was a detente of sorts, a tacit agreement to coexist peacefully for the remainder of the reunion. Watching the extended family interact, children playing tag between the tables, elderly aunts exchanging gossip, cousins catching up on each other's lives, I felt a surprising contentment. The family tapestry was complex, woven with both strong and frayed threads. My decision to stop being the family ATM had strained some connections while unexpectedly strengthening others. Penny for your thoughts, Trevor said, noticing my contemplative expression. I was just thinking that family is complicated, I replied. But worth the effort. He raised his glass in a subtle toast. To healthy complications. As darkness fell and lanterns illuminated the outdoor space, Trevor called for everyone's attention. Before dessert, I want to thank you all for making the journey here this weekend. Family connections matter, perhaps now more than ever in our busy, disconnected world. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. I propose a new tradition, he continued, a family reunion every 2 years, rotating hosts among those who are able, not out of obligation, but out of genuine desire to maintain our connections across generations and geography. The idea was met with enthusiastic approval. Various cousins immediately began volunteering for future hosting duties, the planning, taking on a life of its own. In that moment, watching my extended family embrace the concept of connection without coercion, I realized how fundamentally my perspective had shifted over the past 6 months. Family could be a source of joy and support without financial entanglement. Boundaries didn't have to mean isolation, and my worth wasn't measured by what I could provide materially, but by who I was as a person. The walking ATM had been replaced by simply Jessica, cousin, nephew, uncle, son, connected by choice rather than compulsion, valued for presence rather than provision. As the evening wound down and stars emerged above the lake, Emma found me again, slipping her small hand into mine. Are you leaving tomorrow, Uncle Jessica? I nodded. After breakfast. I have to work on Monday. Will you come back next time? For the next reunion? Absolutely, I promised, and meant it. She smiled, satisfied with this commitment to future connection. Good. I'm going to be a photographer. Like you by then. I'm saving my allowance for a camera. Saving your allowance? That's impressive planning, I said, genuinely proud of her developing financial awareness. Dad's teaching us about delayed gratification, she explained with adorable seriousness. It means waiting for something better instead of spending on something okay right now. I smiled at her perfect definition. Your dad is very wise. He says he learned it from you, she replied simply before skipping off to join the other children. Her words stayed with me long after the gathering dispersed for the night. Perhaps my greatest contribution to my family wasn't the money I had provided over the years, but the example I was setting now of financial responsibility, healthy boundaries, and genuine connection not predicated on monetary exchange. The next morning, as I packed my car for the journey home, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weekend had been challenging but clarifying. Some relationships would need time to heal, others might never fully recover, but I had stayed true to my boundaries without sacrificing my place in the family circle. As I pulled away from Trevor's lake house, waving to those gathered on the porch, I knew with certainty that closing my wallet had finally opened the door to healthier connections, based not on what I could give, but on who I truly was. The walking ATM had shut down permanently. In its place stood a man reclaiming his financial future while redefining the true meaning of family support. It wasn't the path of least resistance, but it was the path to an authentic relationship. And that ultimately was worth more than all the money I had ever given away. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.